That is why I try to turn that on. Cool. I'm gonna share really quick my screen. And I got a couple little things. Minimize that. Yay. And I heart you, Ahmed. Okay. I try to keep that part going on. Cool. So, thank you everybody for coming. My name is Matthew. I'll talk a little bit more about like who I am and all those things, answer a bunch of questions and such. I'm glad you're here. Um, it was a weird start this semester because of well, the fact of the matter is we've been having classes for a weekish or so, and I was just a little bit concerned about when people were coming in. So, but yay. Cool. So, I wanted to show you guys how I'm taking attendance here. And there is a gigantic Zoom link, not Zoom link, QR code here that you guys can scan and go in. When you scan this, what it'll do is it gives me a list of who is coming in at what time and things like that too. And again, this doesn't have to be perfect, but I'll go into a little bit on about how attendance works. See, we already have people just adding on to this. I'll get a different one of these for every single week. Um, I'm not a massive stickler for time. I mean, if you're coming in 15 minutes late because you've got some family issue or something like that, more power to you. I'm all about it. I'm kind of working on the mentality that all of you can manage yourself, and you don't need me to be a parental role in this. You don't need that type of thing in your life. So um, that's just kind of my philosophy, but that's how that kind of connects with everything that we're doing here. So sure. And this is could you please pronounce your name? Because I'm gonna butcher that.
It's Sequana.
Sequana. Okay, Sequana. And there is that it is on Blackboard under assignment or class documents, I believe. So just when you guys come into class, log into that. I'm not directly saying this, but if you cannot make it to class, still might be smart to jump in there and take that because I'm not going to really directly notice. But again, I've been a student too, so I totally get it. But there you go. Does that give you guys what you need to be able to log in? We still getting more in? Yeah, beautiful. We still have another six some odd people that haven't done it yet too. But again, you guys can handle that. Um, I have for all y'all on Blackboard your syllabus, which I'm very open to change things that are on the syllabus if for some reason you don't agree with it, don't like something with it. Ahmed, I think you're amazing. Thank you so much for every tiny little bit of help that you're giving. Cool. Ahmed just gave the link for it um above. You can use that to sign in as too. I'll actually I'm just going to copy this and I'll put it on minimize that bad boy. Of course. So many things. Course documents and edit. That should, yeah, there's the login underneath that too, if for some reason you need to get in there that way. But there we go. So far, any questions about how I take attendance? Do you like this method, dislike this method? Yeah. It's better than me trying to go through uh, and check to see who did what and things like that too. I am keeping a copy of the transcript as well as transcribing discussions in here too, because if for some reason you come in late, but yet you make a contribution by actually discussing things in class, that to me is full credit. Um, I'll go into this a little bit too, but I'm a institutional organizational psychologist, meaning that I look at how businesses and how the psychology basically of business. Let's put it that way. So one of the big things that I have a very big problem with the world right now is that a lot of workers are not really being as respected for the fact that their time is valuable. They're being hired to do a job, and that job is not really paying for the time unless it's like a service industry where literally I am paying you to have the time that you are here to do that type of task. More often than not, we tend to need to have just if the deliverables are met, why would it matter if you're there the entire time just sitting there twiddling your thumbs? That makes no sense to me. So, in a lot of ways, I like honoring the concept of if you produce, that's great. Yeah, it's on you for what you want to get out of this course or anything else like that too. So that's kind of like one of the reasons why I approach this that way. Cool. So, of course, I've lost a little. That's why. Um, let's start going through the syllabus. Does that sound like a smart idea at this point? Yay. So I'm going to change that. Cool. So basic stuff, we have a textbook that we're picking for this class. You can get a digital version. Any earlier version, that's completely fine. We're not going to be using any attached stuff to this too. I purposely chose this because it was relatively inexpensive. It also covers a lot of stuff in there too that you may be able to use in future psychology courses if you choose to go that route as well. So we'll go a little bit about well, what psychology is, what's going on too, but primarily our whole thing is that we basically just want to give you an overview of what this gigantic concept of psychology really is. Um, I am my doctorate's actually in business. I have taken very few psychology classes in my entire life. However, I have a terminal degree and I live in this world. All my publications are in psychology, so that's one of the reasons why they're having me teach this course. I'm also going to give a lot more of an actual applicable how this can translate into practice. Um, I have a medical practice. That's what my main job is. I'm transitioning into academia. My wife and I are retiring. I'm in practice with my wife. I am not licensed. I operate under her license and my other medical practitioners, as well as I've had counselors on my team as well too. So we deal a lot with mental health. So I like looking at this saying practically, how does this really work for people? Thus, I want the class to actually have value for you in that capacity. If you're not actually able to connect this in some way to your real life, that means that I'm failing you as an instructor and you need to call me on it. There will be no negative ramifications. It just means that I'm going to get better at what I do. Was everybody basically able to find the book as well as get a digital copy of it? Cool. Did anybody get the digital like free finding version? I am not able to because they look at this and they look at what I publish on Blackboard. I know you guys will tend to have a WhatsApp group. So if you have a WhatsApp group, I would recommend just posting a link to that for everybody else to be able to get a hold of it too. Yeah, seventh edition. I wouldn't go back to like the third or fourth just because it there has been some pretty big changes that have happened in general. But I mean, even 2017 is a pretty old edition if you think about it. That's almost 8 years old. So, again, if somebody wants to set up your WhatsApp group for discussions or for anything that you want to have about this course or things like that, please take that on yourself. Again, I don't want to do it myself because that would make it to where I'm taking over what you guys were doing. That's more so for you. I want to have no influence on that whatsoever. So be able to speak freely. I mean, comment about how horrible of a human being I am or something along those lines. Completely fine. Do that in that capacity where it's safe, kind of your own private, secure Reddit group. So yay. Um, yeah, almost everything will be posted in Blackboard for you. Um, I will try to put any slides that I have for my lectures in the course documents. You can see that I have in the course documents. Um, it's under lectures. You can see that there is the one for this chapter already there too. So the annoyance with a once a week class is that basically we have to cover an entire chapter. So it's a large amount of some just talking head at you guys during a chunk of time on this. I try to break that up with discussions, but the long and the short of it is um, there's just going to be time where this is going to be a difficult perspective for all of us presenting or being part of it. If you need to take a bio break or anything like that too, just get up, go, nothing like that too. We will take official bio breaks because I will need to step away and use the facilities and things like that too. So that's kind of like the picture of how I like to run a class. Trying to think what else was there too. Um, before I start jumping into attendance, do you guys have any other questions about like who I am, things like that too? Because I've not talked about anything personal. What matters to you guys as an instructor? Here's some rough basics. Like I'll also post my CV on this as well too about some of my publications. Cool. Reese would like to know more about what I I do. Um, I am transitioning out of practice. My wife and I are very tired of the medical world. It's just we're not getting paid as much for services we've been rendering. Additionally, it's kind of lost a little bit of its joy, and I've learned that I much prefer teaching to anything. I really, really love to teach. It's one of my favorite things in the world to just kind of break down concepts. And it's magical to me when I see a student's lights come on when not the fact that I taught them anything, it's that they are able to make applicable what they're learning in a completely different way. I kind of have the philosophy that education in general, the way that we've been presenting it for bachelor's degrees and such, is kind of a scam because in some ways it's like a gatekeeping tool for a lot of employers. Now, and you can learn almost all this material anyways just by going on YouTube. I mean, you can get a pretty decent education just through YouTube. Some people like having the hand-holding or the perspective of this. In this perspective, you also get credit for it and you can get a degree so you can basically be part of the pay-to-play model that we have for employment and things along those lines. So yeah, I live in Indiana. That's kind of a strangest thing. I've been teaching for Brooklyn since 2002, I believe. Yeah, 2002. Sorry, days kind of blend together on this as well too. I'm relatively new in my career. I got my doctorate in 2023, and I tend to look at like workplace mistreatment, as well as the interface of family support and how that makes it to where a person can be able to accomplish things that they normally wouldn't. There's a bunch of cool theories that are associated with it. I love doing that. Um, with that said, another little side thing in that too is I really love doing studies on single mothers or just mothers in general because I have no clue why a lot of the employees I've had or just women in general are capable of getting things accomplished in this world. They have the least amount of resources in a lot of cases, and yet are asked to do so much more. And yet, at the same point, too, they're also managing our children in a lot of cases. So they're contributing the most to society, but at the same point, too, we crap on them, we pay 30% less. It just doesn't make sense why they're such an effective group of people. So that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of big into that. Um, Outside of the academia world and my practice, um, I've started a lot of businesses. I like finding a problem in society and helping solve that part of the problem. And on top of it too, when I'm doing those type of things, I tend to find like non-traditional businesses. And I realize this is not a business course, but again, it's just giving you some information about me. Um, I'm a knitter. I like knitting. I know that sounds kind of strange and it's very atypical for a man to say that they enjoy that. I adore it. I love being able to do something with my hands. It's actually something that's also used very common in psychology, something like that. Um, yeah, I love seeing that a bunch of other people love crocheting and knitting. It's one of my favorite things. I love the fact that you're asking what type of music I like. As you can see, I also studied music. That was something that I studied. I had a completely different career prior to the business world that I'm in. I was a performer, and very often in that too, I was doing vocal performance. Opera was my main world. That involves a lot of acting, which involves a massive amount of psychology. So this is something I've been living in this world and trying to understand why behavior can occur, what is the motivation, the thought behind actions. Does thought really matter? And we'll go into some of these theories because the fact of the matter is we don't really have anything definitive. We're trying to explain something that's not really physically tangible. The mind, emotions, things like that too. It can be observed in some cases very physically, but not always something that we can just reach out and touch and adjust that emotion per se. Um, I love all types of music. I actually don't listen to music very much, though. It's something that music feels kind of like a work thing to me. And also, I can never stop analyzing it the entire time I listen. So it's kind of hard at some point, the more education you get in that area, to be able to really truly just see it as what it is and the beauty in the moment. So to answer your question, I like all types of music. Um, I I tend to listen a lot more to classical just on my own, but um, yeah, that's that answer. Um, I love to read. Boy, do I read a lot. However, I define reading a little bit differently. I am dyslexic and I fit pretty strongly with the neurodiverse world. So I do almost every single thing that I read, I will also have it either played for me or I'll play it for me or I'll do an audiobook version of that. With that said, every single paper, every single email you guys send me, I will actually be playing that through my phone. There's some really great tools on there that make it to where it sounds like a human being just saying that to me. my brain processes that a little bit better than having words move around and me tending to see, ooh, squirrel, and moving on towards another direction. So I can be a little bit more focused with sound. That may be because of the training in music or just the way my brain is wired. But that's it. Asking, do I like any Russian classics? Um, I've read a lot of Russian works. Dostoevsky is somebody I like. Um, I especially like the nihilistic perspective, because I think that we're tending to have a lot more nihilism that's happening in society right now. But again, that's kind of where we are with that. I'm also a pet person. My wife and I actually breed naked cats. So we have actually I'll quickly show you guys a couple pictures of them as well too. Pictures. Camo. I'll go into my kid in a minute too, because as you can see, I got some pictures there too. But yeah, here's some pictures of some of my kittens. So Naked Cats, it's actually a really cool business. We tend to bring them into the office very frequently because people will open up a lot more when you have this weird cat that almost feels like you're petting a velvet hot water bottle. And since they're naked, people are able to talk to them and we get better clinical outcomes from stuff like that. So to me, it's kind of interesting from that. Yeah, aren't they adorable? Um, so we have 8 of them. Um, these two's parents are right here. This is Pierre and Good Kitty. Um, I have a little boy for my son. Like I had mentioned about my wife, I've been happily married for about 17 years. My son Wesley I'm looking for a more recent picture of him. Of course. Tell you what, I will pull up some emails. I sent something myself the other day. So I just because I was planning on sending this to. This is my son Wesley. Um, totally a very cool kid. He's very much into soccer, football. I hate calling it soccer. This is his main kitty called Baby Kitty. He names all the cats, by the way. He's recently started naming them a little bit more interesting things, but he had a lot of speech issues when he was younger, so that was his. Baby Kitty is an odd-eyed dwarf cat, so very short legs, as well as different color eyes. So just follows him everywhere, is constantly on him every single waking moment of the day. Um, I love that you're asking the question, are they expensive? We sell them, the pets, we sell between $2,000 and $2,500 for per individual cat. Um, each litter normally will have between 4 and 6. Mortality is pretty high on them though, just because they have a lot more health issues than others, just because we're exemplifying a we're exemplifying some of the recessive traits that are going on too. Their lifespans are about 10 to 15 years. I have gotten them up a couple up to 20 in the past as well too. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. I'll see if I have any other fun little pictures. This is my kitty Car Ride. She's my main kitten. Again, more Wesley. He's gonna break some hearts. Here's a bunch of them just hanging out. Believe it or not, we actually have here, this is Good Kitty, Car Ride, and then this one's called Chewy Chips. And that is grandmother, mother, granddaughter. So, so again, more of them. There's actually 5 of them here too. This is Katoja. She's a cat that we got from Russia. We have a couple. We wanted to change our breeding stock, and it's actually very difficult to get breeding cats in the United States. They go for about $5,000 to $6,000 for a breeder. So pretty pretty expensive just in general. Here's Baby Kitty and Wesley. Of course, they like hanging out naked together. You can see his little baby kitty's odd eyes, but they're together all the freaking time. So yeah, here's a picture of some of my other co-authors and some things like that too. More of my kid. This is my wife, Christy. Um, she's a very fun, introverted person. Um, it makes her one of the best doctors in the world for that reason, because she'll go knee to knee with a patient and they'll work through that too. These are my parents. We were at an event for our son Wesley, and they had shirts made from him. It's adorable. So yeah, this is my family. Thoughts? Anything like that? Did I cover with more detail than you probably asked for? Everything personal? Yeah, I love my family. I truly do. Everything I do for them. And my family actually too, I play the role of mom a lot more. So even from the moment my son was born, I made a big point of saying I wanted to change all the diapers. And beyond just changing diapers, I've been very, very actively involved in every single thing that he does. Um, and I use a lot of the developmental psychology tools and things that are out there to understand those relationships and how important milestones are and such in his development. My wife still is mom. She still refers to mom, but she functions more as the more like the dad role type of things. She she gets involved. She'll prepare some meals and things like that too. But it's a little bit of a different thing. This is what's worked for us. Another one of the reasons why we're looking at leaving practice is she's wanting to be more mom. She wants to be more in that role, and she wants me to take more traditional masculine roles that are kind of the norms in society. It's going to be a change, but that's a good thing. So cool. Any other personal questions about who the heck this random guy is, this Bob and is? Cool. Moving on. Cool. I'll jump back into the syllabus, and I think the next thing we have on here is about attendance. So attendance is a percentage of your grade. We'll get into that in a little bit too, but the one of the reasons why I have the logins like that too is because it gives me a timestamp that somebody's actually showing up. I'm required to report that for student aid and things along those lines as well too, so it helps with that. Um, a late login would be a half an hour or later in my book. So if you show up a half an hour late and you still log in, totally cool. That's still a little bit loose. However, if you do sign in, try to participate. Try to ask intelligent questions or just get involved some way with the lecture. I'll immediately move that up to full credit. So yes, um, I want to give everybody A's in this class. I believe that everybody starts with an A. You kind of basically just have to not try to get the grade. That's kind of my mentality. The main deliverables for this class, I'll actually jump to that first. It's a little bit further down here too. Main deliverables for the class will be we have three exams, an assignment, which I'll go into in much greater detail, quizzes, and the attendance. All quizzes and exams are all open book. The exams will be timed, and I'll go into that when I'm going through those sections. But the reason why I have everything available open book is because the lockdown browser thing, it just teaches people to kind of cheat in a different way. How hard would it be for you to pick up your phone and do a Quizlet or something like that for the actual questions? Well, great. So there are people that study that are trying this material. They're trying to do the traditional route. Well, it's not fair to them. So I would rather things just be in general fair. Putting that time frame on there means that it's more like a real circumstance of real life where you're needing to know a psychological concept or looking that up. Well, you should be able to relatively quickly know where to look. That's kind of the purpose of that too. So knowing where to look to categorize these things in your brain, that's kind of the purpose. We'll have a quiz once a week. There will not be one this week because, of course, there was nothing for you guys to see, but I'll post that on Blackboard. Do it anytime that you want with it too. Everything is for that is due at the end of the semester. So you could technically, the evening of exams will be during class hours, quizzes will be outside of class hours. Actually, I think I could just make everything available outside of class hours and just put times on there because I also need to adjust that for people that need accommodations and such. Which I was one of them that used that too. So I think it's a great system. Also, beyond just being open book, there are also multiple attempts. So as many times as you want to take them, get your grade up as high as you possibly can. As you can see, if you just do the quizzes, attendance, and the exams, I mean, that's 70% of your grade. That's a C just for low-hanging fruit. Um, I had a hand raised, but I didn't see who. Would you with a fox ask again? Or did I answer the question?
I think someone asked, are the quizzes and the exams during class hours, but you like had gone up for that.
Thumbs up emoji. Awesome. Cool. And I'm so sorry for just babbling at you guys. That's one of the big things I hate. Um, so I'll go back up to exams and quizzes. So yeah, quizzes, basically whatever's going to be covered in the lecture will be what the things are on. I try to give high points of what likely will be on there, so it's a little bit easier just for you to kind of focus in. However, especially if you have a digital version of the book, it's a much easier to just search the text to find what you're looking for. So again, I'm just trying to help you guys kind of function kind of like ChatGPT in that you're able to categorize information and process it. That's the mentality of a lot of this. So exams, yeah, there'll be three exams. The longest one will be the last one. But again, I'm giving about an hour and 15 minutes to 2 hours. That, of course, can be much longer based off of people that send me a letter about accommodations that need to be needed. So, any questions about the exams and quizzes?
Yeah, I have a question.
Bring it.
For quizzes, you said that those are the ones we can take multiple times.
Oh no, exams too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
And so for
any of those.
Okay, and for both of those, are we gonna see like a due date where we could like take it all on, say that we had a test tomorrow, we'd take them all. If I wanted to do it, say 3 times, I got the highest grade, and then it was due by tomorrow night, like I would just have to retake it or take it until that night.
Love it. So I will make avail, and I love the part of the way that you're asking the question. It's kind of fundamentally going down to when are we able to retake it? I love that. So, basically, the exam one will be available on March 7th. It will be available until the end of the semester, and you're able to retake it as many times as you need to get the higher grade that you're needing. So from this point on, that exam will be available. Um, because I see a hand raised, I'll stop just to answer that because I only see just that hands raised, nothing more for me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, so just to make sure I understand, so once the exam opens, we can retake that exam as many times as we want until the end of the semester.
Yeah,
So it'll just always be open, or there's no due date on it.
the end of the semester.
Okay. Thank you.
Now, one of the reasons why I leave that type of thing open like that is because I want you to succeed. I mean, this is a 100 level course. It doesn't need to be something that just destroys your life in any way academically. If we can get the basic information out, it comes down to you're giving me the deliverable. You've at least accessed the information and you've shown some aptitude at that. That's all that can be really asked out of anyone. So yes, that's available. The quizzes will also be just open every single week. Those all will be due at the very, very end of the semester. Joey, I see.
Yeah, hi. So aside from the tests, there are also a lot of countless essays we have to do, correct?
There's a single essay, and I will
Oh,
go into
so
greater detail on that one.
so just like for the test, you could retake it as many times for the higher grade. Is there by any chance can you give us feedback on the essay that's going to be due later on, and we could revise it until we get the higher grade? Is that
Absolutely. Yep.
okay?
And that's one of the things that I'm kind of hoping will happen, that we can get like multiple drafts going through that process of it. Um,
Hmm.
it's uh, again, I'm all about the final product. We need to.
Hmm.
Again, it's the IO psych part in me. Um, I always want to just come down to what is being delivered, the end product of this.
Hmm.
So it honors you to get to that perspective.
Okay, thank you so much.
Not a problem. And I will go into massive detail. I've actually got multiple documents about what's involved with that essay that we're writing.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Exams and quizzes. Are we all clear on all that? Cool. And only just because you've asked a couple questions, I want to make certain I'm going to pronounce your name right. Is it Ramza? Ramza? Ramsey? What's the proper way of pronouncing that?
Oh, can you repeat what you said?
I'm asking what your name is. How do you pronounce your name?
Oh, it's yeah, you just said it correctly, Ramsey.
Ramsey. Okay. And just you never know. Sometimes you can get that off of also seeing a physical perspective on a person, which by the way, thank you everyone for honoring your own self for not needing to have the cameras on and stuff like that too. If we were doing something like interviews or uh, something along those lines, that type of information is important, but everybody doesn't need to see your personal life just shown up on the screen, even with filters and such. Um, there's way too many things going on that we do not need to be involved with on that. So that's
Yeah.
what we got. So cool. And do your other professors do that? Or are they big about the your camera must be on and you must be wearing red? It's my favorite color.
Yeah, they always make us turn our cameras on.
Yeah, and it's about professionalism. That I think that's kind of the perspective of that. I get it. Sometimes we have to do that. We have to do that as professors just to show that an individual is working specifically on that and that they're the one doing the job. That makes sense if you're dealing with a much later version of this, but again, a class like this is not something that requires that crazy level of you having to just show who you are and prove to me you're good. That's that's bull. I don't like that. Cool. Next thing to talk about is research participation. This is a departmental requirement. It's not as much mine. However, I am very, very open to doing it. I personally really love this because as a researcher, I always have a problem finding enough participants for my studies. During this semester, it's required that you will participate in somebody's research projects. Now, there are live ones that you can do on campus where they can do some physical studies. I'm okay with even survey type of things. So I'll share surveys that come through because that is a type of research. Um, Alternatively, you do not need specifically to do the be participate in the research. You can actually just do a article review an article circumstance, and I can show you how to do that. So it's nothing really crazy. I had a question about, can the quizzes be done during class hours, or they can be done later? They can be done anytime. You have time throughout the week to complete them. Yep. And basically until it's done. Yeah. Research participation is mandatory, meaning that something for that credit is mandatory. You can choose not to participate in research and just do a little 1.5 page review of the article. I will show in class how to actually do that type of thing. So in other classes too, you can just make this more streamlined. So are there any questions about that research participation? Because that tends to be something that's a little bit more of a confusing thing for people.
Yeah. So we're only participating in people's research, or are we going to be doing our own research projects as well?
You're only participating in your own research, I mean, in other people's research.
Okay, thank you.
To have
I
you,
just have a question.
yeah, what do you got?
Um, so let's say, like the surveys you said,
Hmm.
that we can participate in, do we take a screenshot of the completion and email it to you? Or
Thumbs
how
up
would that
emoji.
work?
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I recommend you do these type of things earlier than later. Um, and I will post a whole bunch of research opportunities. Anytime that I see one, I always end up saying, hey, if you fit this criteria, please do this research because they're always needing stuff like that. So that's basically where you can find it. For the alternatives, I will put a bunch of papers that are available for you guys to do a review of just in general. Or we can say, hey, you say I'm interested in such and such topic. I need to find a paper. I can easily help you find that paper. Joey, you had a question.
Yeah, so just to clarify on the alternative, you would just give us a source, and our goal is to just summarize what the source says
Pretty much, yes.
per a
It's
page. How
fundamentally
long?
simple. Yep.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Surprisingly, the research would take you about the same time as doing the alternative. That's just how that kind of works with the amount of time that you'd be involved with it. You can also get extra credit and such. I'm guessing most people are not going to need the extra credit or even want to do the extra credit, but we can go into some more details there if you need it. The research is not limited to Brooklyn College. However, you are physically there, so it might be a little bit easier. So again, any place that you find a study on, just do it, take a screenshot, you're done. That it's that relatively that simple.
And we just have to participate in like one person's and like take a screenshot or like multiple.
3 of them. You have to do 3 throughout the semester. So just take a screenshot of like the informed consent on it. See if I can get you a Qualtrics login.
You're gonna email to our BC emails or the emails linked to our Q&A account.
I'll put them on Blackboard.
Okay.
What is that? What is this called? Qualtrics. I'll show you what that will roughly look like. Do, 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 do. So here's a bunch of some studies that I have done, but so here's one. How about, oh yeah, it's at the bottom. Let's preview it. There we go. So here's the informed consent. That first page. Take a screenshot of that, send it to me. That's every tiny little bit of detail that I know. Now, I can't officially see that you took part in that, but it's kind of like the honor system thing. I also think you'll probably get something out of it if you actually go through it yourself and start reading through them. Any questions about that research side?
Um, when you get a chance, can you attach that to Blackboard?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm going to actually if not next, actually next week makes the most sense because we're looking at research methods. I'll actually talk about what's involved and I'll show you how we put together studies and things along those lines and how to do that research participation part of it. So that just kind of
Thank you so much.
dovetails. I gotcha. Cool. So the other thing, and this is the one thing that I think everybody is gonna have the most freak out about per se, is I do have a paper requirement for this one course. Now, again, I'm not trying to be crazy by anything about asking this, but it's worth 30% of your grade. In Blackboard, we have a write-up under course documents about, oh, there's a thing here about research participation too. While I'm still there. I've got a good detailed descriptions of what's actually needed for that and how to turn in. Email's good, whatever. Just you can email me that picture. Cool. So let's get rid of that and go back. Have I put the thing about the paper? Oh, assignments. Yeah, under assignments, we have the writing assignment. Cool. So I have a pretty detailed document here too about what's expected and also how to narrow down the topic that you're looking at. So ultimately, this is going to be, because it's worth a big chunk of your grade. And I kind of looked at it too. 6 to 8 double space pages. Now I know that seems like a lot. Oh my gosh, I would love it if I have a hard time writing anything in 6 to 8 pages with the amount of writing that I tend to do as a researcher. This is not that crazy of a requirement if you just spend some time specifically on this. I explained why I'm looking at each of the amount of time, how long it really should take you. If it's taking you longer than this, you're likely doing it wrong, and we need to make your life a little bit easier by minimizing this. So, yeah, basically this is about 2 weeks worth of your work. That is 2 weeks of a full-time job would be what is being kind of asked for out of all this. Sorry, that's not, it's about 1 week's worth of work full-time. That's of the full thing. I apologize. So what basically we'll do with this as well too is we'll find a topic that you like based off of any of the chapters that we have. So each chapter has a different topic just in general, and you come up with a more detailed research question to find out what's actually in the literature associated with this. So I purposely went through and I broke this down to about if we were considering doing the antecedents of the willingness to receive mental health care. So basically, what makes people willing to get mental health therapy? If I just had you do this to be able to cover that topic in general, that'd be 20 to 30 pages. It's crazy all the things that you would need to cover to be able to adequately express that. However, if you go down even further and say antecedents of willingness of minority groups, well, now you don't need to talk about all aspects. You need to talk about more specific things for that minority group. Now we can make it even more specific and get it down to the 68 area by saying minority demographics in the United States during the COVID pandemic. Okay, we've added multiple little variables to limit that down. So this may be an emails back and forth between us saying, I'm thinking about doing such and such topic. Is this too broad? I'll do a cursory look at the literature to make certain you've got enough sources that you can be able to write something on that. And we can just do back and forth on it. I am fine rereading 2, 3 sentences. If you just want to say, I want to make certain I'm starting right. Totally cool. Yes. Again, lots and lots of topics. I would like to have you have at least 5 to 7 academic sources on that, and also it's going to be an APA format. I'm not a massive stickler for APA, but a lot of people are, so it's better to get that in there. I'm expecting there to be an introduction, basically explaining why this is relevant to psychology and why it's relevant to you. Synthesize basically what you've read in the literature about saying what it actually says, as well as problems that you're seeing, things like that, and then conclude what you see with those findings and how it's actually applicable to you. Ramsey, what do you got, man?
I was just frozen for like the last 5 minutes.
Oh,
So when is this due?
end of the semester.
End of the semester? And are you gonna go over this more as time like we go through class?
Not only will I be going through it, I'll tell you how to do a chunk of this with ChatGPT.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. I didn't really get a lot of what you just said, because I was frozen.
Yeah, all good. Again, this is probably the thing that I think everybody's going to have the most struggle with just in general because, well, I'm asking you to write a larger paper. That's kind of annoying in a lot of cases because not everybody enjoys writing. I want your voice on this. If you can think of an alternative for writing this, I'm also open to that too. So if for some reason you want to do some massive project or something that can get similar assimilation and showing that you actually can apply the material, then great, I'm open to that too. I don't want to just throw out a bunch of those things though to come up with some of your own and we'll figure that out. Any major questions? You could start turning in drafts today. I'm not saying you should, but it might be smart to start saying, hey, I'm interested in this aspect of psychology. Well, great. So then we'll narrow that part down. There's a whole bunch of things that are available. Joey, what do you got?
So the subject we write our paper on, does it have to be a subject that was discussed in class or any subject related to psychology?
It has to be a subject related to something we've discussed in class, but that will fit in almost any aspect of psychology. If it does not fit in any of these things, I'm very open to you actually going with that topic as well too, because it means you're going beyond what we're just presenting in class. So I'm going to give pretty much every week, I'm going to give like some examples of if you chose to do a paper on this topic, this is what something like this would look like. Here's a way to basically do something like this.
I'm sorry, my computer cut out. What was the answer that I was assuming that it must be something from this class?
No, well, yes, but no. I apologize.
Uh,
Um, the it doesn't have to officially be a topic that we directly covered in class, but almost any topic in psychology will somehow touch to something in class. So if it doesn't directly fit, just pitch the research concept to me and I'll
uh,
make certain at least we're in the same area.
uh, okay, and we should email if I want to start today. We
Yep,
should email a topic to the email on the syllabus.
yep,
Okay, thank you so much.
not a problem. I always wanted things to be fair and easy.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Anybody else got any other questions? Cool. I also have included with this too some guidelines for using large language models. basically ChatGPT and things like that too. Um, in general, I'm expecting you to use this just because that's a general, the way the world works circumstance. We are having such a revolution with AI. It's actually something that is going to take a lot of jobs, and it's also something that our brains work very similar to large language models. So I'd recommend that you actually start really getting comfortable with using it. Now, it's like a calculator. You don't want to just copy and paste and have it write you a 6,000 page essay on this. That's not your work. That's just taking the output from a calculator. But you can use chunks of that and do some rewriting, having it be some organization, stuff like that too. I'll show you how to do that. I publish very frequently with ChatGPT. So it's a huge, useful tool, and it can be something that just enhances your writing. So that's kind of the aim with it. Cool. Are we good with all that? Okay, I've in my little agenda here too. There's going to be a 10 to 20 questions on the quizzes. That's the other little thing too. I think I said I don't want to misquote. 5 to 7 sources. So yeah, there's lots and lots and lots of options on that too. So, and this does not need to be something I'm interested in, meaning like it's not something that I'm passionate about, like in the social psychology side of things. That's just where I spend a lot of my time. I love all aspects of psychology. I to be able to look at how ADHD is impacting people's intimate relationships. I'd love to read a paper on that. Or how schizophrenia can impact other people, other aspects of people's um, physical health. That'd be a fantastic topic. Like, how does schizophrenia impact aspects of a person's physical grooming? That would be a fantastically fun paper to read. I'm expecting it to be a little messy, though. Sorry, I had to throw in a dad joke. Cool. To let you guys know, I also will probably never go the entire full time that we are presenting, that we're scheduled to be here. It's hard for everybody just to sit here and stare off into space during a class like this too. So I don't want to force you to be on that. When we're done, we're done. That's kind of like the mentality that I look at on it. Um, does anybody does anybody have any general arguments to that? I mean, most people are pretty good with if I'm not actually being asked to do anything, I'd rather go do something else. Cool. I will go back into the research participation again in a second. Um, with that said, I'm also not offended by any if you guys are doing some other type of task while we're doing this class as well. So if for some reason you want to be knitting, or if you're I'm using knitting as the example, or crocheting because we've talked about that. Some people play video games during class because it helps keep their mind a little bit more focused. We'll talk about why in individual classes a little bit later when we start talking about cognition, what makes a person be present and aware and be able to synthesize information. So I will go back to the research participation in a second. What made me want to teach at Brooklyn? It was a very interesting thing for me about how I got this gig because initially I was hired just to teach a strategic human resource class in for the psych department. Um, Again, I went to school for business. It's not something that most business people don't immediately go right into psychology. I like this department. I like every aspect of what Brooklyn really is. I adore the diversity. It is such a cool thing to be the only white guy in the room, because I love being outside of my perspective of who I am and who you are. I want to hear more about you. And I'm not being political with this, but there's DEI is a very big buzzword topic now. I adore the principles of DEI. I think that in all honesty, diversity is something that brings massive use to the workforce as well as it does some great things for individuals. Because when people can be who they really are, all of a sudden we start getting much more productive people, and happier society, which means also we have less problems with child abuse and we start looking for other ways to help out society. That theory is broaden and build theory. So when a person is able to be themselves, they get to be truly themselves, and everybody wins. So Brooklyn is one of those great places that I get that. Conversely, I also teach at University of Louisiana Monroe. It's a very, very different group of students, and I'm not trying to just minimize and say that they're bad students. Quite the opposite. I have a lot more what I have a lot more of what I would go so far as say as traditional students, students that are the 18 years old, going off to college, mom and dad are paying for it, circumstance. Um, Again, not that that's bad, it's just it's different. I love about Brooklyn that again we have people at work here. Well, that's great. I know you guys are working. You're probably working 3 or 4 jobs just to pay the freaking rent that is ridiculous where you are. So you have a culture, you have a work ethic that no other people have. So much so that my wife and I have talked about when I take a full-time teaching job at another university, we're trying to figure out any way I can just to be able to keep teaching at least an adjunct once a semester-ish class because working with all of you guys really fuels me. I love hearing very different perspectives than my own. I liked being questioned about standard views that I have. So that's a good thing. I like altering the world. Cool. Yes, research participation. Let's jump back to that question. I actually had a specific thing on that in here. Come on. So again, everything's due at the end of the semester. Um, what aspect of are you wanting me to recover with the research participation? I don't want to just kind of babble at you. Cool. So what you would do is just like I had up that one survey that I had, you'll follow a link to a website. That's one way that you can do this, or you can go and actually physically sign up and have somebody do tests. There's some really cool ones where they'll do rapid eye movement type of things, or they'll have you read something and see, do you get elements of arousal while going through it? Again, you find a study to take part of, you do 3 of them. The surveys are the easiest, and especially considering we're online, it tends to be a little bit easier. If we were physical, live, I would actually walk you guys over to the lab and start showing you this is what the type of thing that's expected here. And we would probably have more of an in-person requirement for it, but it is what it is. So yes, you take a copy of the screenshot of the informed consent, which is normally that first page. It says this is what you're agreeing to take part of the study. That's basically what the informed consent is. Take a screenshot or a picture of it and email it to me. That's it. So and then you take the study. Then you actually just take the survey. So I've also got a couple people that are texting me right now as well about with some of the topics and things like that too. Please feel free to text me. I can take texts up until about 2 or 3 in the morning. I don't sleep a lot. Again, that's more on the neurodiversity side. But yes, so that's the route you can go. So please feel free to text me. I almost prefer text because it's just easier to get quick responses on things. Cool. I'm going to recommend we take a moment break, and then the next thing we'll do is go through, and I'm going to try to power through this first lecture to just kind of see. This first one's probably going to feel a little bit more static compared to every other one we'll do in the future. I want to see the level of engagement we get and stuff like that too. So I'll retool this once we get a little bit more. But why don't we take a few minute break? How about we come back at 10:50? Does that good? 10 minutes sound good for everybody? Cool. I am gonna stop recording this bad boy and we will see all y'all in a few minutes. Stop recording. Hey everybody, welcome back. Are we all back enough that I can at least start showing some stuff? Howdy. So it's going to be harder for me to specifically see any of the chat stuff. So if you have a question or if you're wanting to comment about something specifically, please raise your hand, at least to let me know, hey, go check. Okay? Because I just won't be able to see as well. I'm gonna share my little lecture. Seeing it? We're seeing it. Beautiful. Actually, I think what I'll do is I'll pull up my other device, and that will be my chat device. Turning that volume off. Okay. Cool. I can now see any chats that are coming through. Yay. Okay. Cool. So again, we're talking about psychology. I don't know why that muted. That did that. Cool. We're talking about psychology and the general concepts of what kind of have brought us to where roughly we are now with the different types of psychology that are out there. So, believe it or not, most of psychology actually came from philosophy. And that'll make a lot more sense when we actually start talking a little bit about that. But psychology is the scientific study of the mind and the behavior. We kind of define the mind as that inner experience of thoughts, experiences, memories, anything that's basically inside your head that make you you is your mind. Behavior is what we observe. And I almost disagree with the term that they use here to describe the non-human animals, because now we're starting to actually look a little bit more at AI, as there's a psychology that's associated with that too. We're going to see a lot more of that as they come in. But the word psychology comes from the word psyche, initially in Greek, meaning about spirit, soul. They in some Hindu cultures they refer to as the Atman, which is also associated with breath. Actually, that's sorry, Atman is soul, pranayama is breath, but it's still they share similar root words. We didn't actually have the term for this until about the 1650s. So it's psychology as the way we study it has been around for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And we're going to go specifically into some of those physiological roots to start with. Now, to be honest, a big problem that we have is that when we're talking about psychology, we mean Western psychology. And respectfully, it's a study of old white guys. As you can see, we just got a bunch of pictures of that. Freud is the perfect example of that. We'll talk about him a little bit today too. But again, we tend to have a little bit more of a strange slant, especially early, because we have the traditional views of Western culture of masculinity and also of femininity at the same point too. Not to mention the concepts of third gender or other genders that are associated as well. Those things don't traditionally fit in the culture of white men. So it tends to be a little bit of a problem. However, there are other approaches to psychology, and I'll just even mention one of them specifically. I use this one a lot in my own practice, quite literally. The Chinese view, the Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, has 5 different elements, and those 5 different elements each have a different part of the spirit that's directly connected to an organ or an organ system of the body. This was developed 2,000-3,000 years before our traditional Western psychology mentality. But as you can see, we start getting things like the Qi, which is associated with the kidneys. The Qi connects specifically about how we maintain information or we make judgments. If we would equate that to Western psychology, that would be using dual process theory. That's the system 1 thinking. Again, we'll go into those theories much, much later in the semester. We have the intellect, we have the spirit, the general spirituality associated with people. We have the animal soul, the corporeal spirit, which is associated specifically with connection to the our desires, our emotions, our fight or flight response, which is kind of interesting that connects with the lungs because we tend to see more clavicular breathing concept versus diaphragmatic breathing of slowly lifting and rising the diaphragm. That's a different perspective on that. There's a whole bunch of different ways that they tend in the Chinese medicine to look at things like this. Those all connect via ways of, we have these different elements, they all relate like this to where they either will strengthen or weaken different types of relationship. So let's say I'm having an issue with the water meridian. So that would be kidney. That's associated with I'm having a lot of fear. Well, one of the best things to do when a person's having a lot of fear or anxiety in the Chinese world is that they would want to then deal with getting something more grounded. So we want to, if we were treating with acupuncture, we would treat the earth points on the water meridians. Or we would try to get other aspects of earth into their life. And earth doesn't mean physical earth, but it's manifestations close to that. So things like it. It's a pretty cool world. You could do an entire psychology world associated with this if you wanted to actually go into it. But again, Western psychology is not the only way that we actually have tried to answer a lot of these questions. In African cultures, we have circumstances to where we look at collectivist well-beings, not as much about the individual. We tend to look a lot more at understanding human behavior or concepts of thought with the community involved as well too. You're not an individual, it's part of the community. They also integrate a lot more of the spiritual perspective. Similar things with the Indigenous people of America, as well as other Indigenous organizations. They tend to bring in a lot of others. Does anybody else have any other perspectives or things from their quote unquote home culture that they want to kind of talk about? That's something that we tend to look at psychology a bit different. An example of that I would especially love is hearing a Middle Eastern slash Arabic view of that. Does Western psychology tend to fit with that? Thoughts? Anybody? Cool. There, we finally get. Can you give an example of Western psychology? Yeah, I was asking specifically for those that are from other cultures. Are do we tend to look at other perspectives of how the mind works, how the behavior works that's different in another culture? And specifically, I'm wanting to hear about Middle Eastern type of views because I'm not ultra familiar with it. I know a little bit of Arabic, but I just don't. I would love to hear more if anybody has any perspectives. Um, I'll give some examples of some Western philosophy, but I mean Western psychology, but it tends to be a lot more individual based. We're questioning between just about what behavior means for an individual and why they have misbehaviors or miscommunications with their body and mind. That's what tends to be the big thing in Western culture. So any thoughts? Anybody? We can move on. I just was wanting to try to use anybody. Yeah, go on.
I think that like I'm Middle Eastern, so I'd say somewhat of a Middle Eastern psychology is kind of like family based.
Okay.
It's like you're very close to your family.
And that's not something we look at a lot in Western culture, and we kind of touch into it a little bit with some areas of psychology, but it's not something that we can separate out as much in it's seen as some family is seen as something that's separate in Western psychology. I would probably argue that in Middle Eastern culture, it's a lot more family centric. Family is a part of self. So cool. I
Yeah, I
won't,
think so too.
yeah, I'm not going to labor as much on the point, but yeah, I just wanted specifically because I know we tend to have a little bit larger amount of that demographic in here. Um, I especially in these perspectives that we're talking about with Western psychology, if something in your culture specifically that just doesn't make any sense in your culture, please bring that up because it's something that more people need to hear and why there's a problem with the way we're looking at it with this traditional Western psychology perspective. So cool. I'll go to that next spot. So in this chapter, the big points to look at are these different types of psychological frameworks. This is the type of thing I'm also going to give you guys for every week for quizzes and such about saying I'm guaranteeing you that those words will be on some type of the questions for the quizzes. You can also search the lecture notes as well too. So that's something that would help with your tests as well. But that's one of the reasons why I structure this that way. So the first thing that we're trying to do in Western philosophy and psychology was to answer this question about, is there a mind-body connection? And is there also reality? What is reality? we have four theories that initially that kind of brought out about where we kind of are with what the mind is compared to what the body is. The first one is the philosophical dualism. It can be summed up very, very easily in the cogitur ergo sum, or I think, therefore I am. It's Rene Descartes' mentality initially, where we have a direct view that we know we exist because we have a perspective of our mind. That we can physically touch our body, but those thoughts, even just cognition, just in general, or emotions, are something that in dualism they started saying, well, we have two different perspectives. We have a physical body and we have a mind. Those are two different things, and they are separate from each other. That's the mentality that kind of worked as well too. Now there are some problems with just having that mentality. It doesn't really have any scientific. We don't really have a way to to scientifically really test that in any way. We have just, I think, and therefore it's in my own head. So we've started we started looking a little bit differently at dualism more recently, with neuroscience looking at things like fMRIs about the way a person actually thinks about something. The brain actually does show a lot more of that evidence, because now we have the capabilities of looking at it. We did not have that originally. I mean, we didn't have fMRIs when Descartes was coming up with these ideas. Now, this has laid some good connections for the psychosomatic medicine. A good example of psychosomatic medicine would be chiropractic is a good example of that. But also people that tend to have psychosomatic illnesses like what's the best way of describing it? Super, they tend to just get sick because they think they're sick. That tends to be something that would show a connection using this mentality as a lens to explain what's actually happening with the brain. It's also helped a lot with the concept of what actually self-awareness is. So there's some things that are starting to come a little bit more back up with dualism that's happening now. Conversely, we have this concept called monism or materialism. This was brought up by a guy named Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes, you probably have heard of Calvin and Hobbes, the cartoon characters, like the kid and his tiger slash stuffed animal. It was named after Hobbes. Hobbes directly disagreed with Descartes, and he said the mind and body are actually the same exact thing. They just are functioning slightly different, but they're all part of the same perspective. So that's ultimately the concept of what's different with that. Again, we're starting to see with fMRIs and things like that too, that when we have a physical effect on the body, it'll actually affect the brain. If we have an emotion, we start seeing that will show up on the body. So an example of, and you can see this on people too, when you just look at them as a clinical therapist or you just as an individual, somebody saying, I'm not stressed. And if you're seeing me on the camera, my shoulders are basically earrings at this point. I am using the tissues of my body to express what's happening with what's happening in my brain. A problem that kind of comes up with that is that we don't really even know we're doing it in a lot of cases, but it ends up manifesting on the body. So again, there's a lot of arguments back and forth about saying, well, are they two completely separate systems that we should be treating separately? Or should we be treating them at the same time, or even viewing them and viewing behavior and everything all as a single unit? Cool. Are we on the same page so far? What are your thoughts? Do you guys tend to believe that you're more on the materialism side? Are you more on the dualism side? Really, just on these pure mind and body connection. What do you think psychology really, the brain is separate from the body? That's interesting. A lot of people are jumping on the dualism perspective. Cool. So we just got another monism. So again, we've got some strong stances on this on both. Give me an argument on either side. I mean, I'd love to hear kind of why dualism, why materialism. What?
Um,
Yeah.
I would say I could see myself like kind of following both sides, but for dualism, as an athlete, like
Love it.
you kind of hear, I don't really know how to phrase it, but like you hear like you like your mind gives up before your body does, or your body gives up before your mind does. So
Yeah.
like thinking of that, like how could really both be connected if like your body's so tired, but like if your mind's telling you to keep running, like you're gonna keep running. Or if like your mind's telling you stop, but your body's like, no, I can keep going, like that's two separate things and not a single unit. But at the same time, when you think about like your mind controlling your body, like is it the same, is it the same unit?
I love your example. That is super, super sexy of a good example of that. Because yeah, the body's capable of going. We almost push it beyond what the mind is thinks is capable of doing. Um, I'll go so even further with that. What about circumstances where the body just physically reacts to something like my kid is trapped in a burning car? Well, we have circumstances where people will literally tear a door off the car, or they'll lift a car off the ground. Well, okay, is their brain really involved in that? Or is that a physiological response that is associated with just body function? Do those connect, or am I going too far with that?
I get what you're saying. I feel like it's more a body thing because like there's moments in life, I'm pretty sure everybody's experienced, like there will just be some very crazy moment you experience if you have, and it's like, oh, you didn't think your body just acted on its own. And then it's like after the situation, just thinking about it's like, how the hell did I do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would also think
What
that's
about
like your,
go on, sorry.
I would think that's like your brain working with your body because it's like your brain is like, you have to do this now. And it's like telling your body you have to do it and that you can do it. Like you wouldn't think that you could just pull a door off, but your mind is telling you you can in that moment.
I want
Well,
to counter that.
the
Sorry.
argument would be on that, though, that the body wouldn't even, I mean, the mind wouldn't even think, can or I can't open this door or tear this door off. It would just do it because we all would probably agree too. Well, there's no way I would be able to pull that door off its hinges. There's no way that a 40 pound, I'm sorry, 100 pound person would be able to just to do that. That doesn't make any sense that they would do it. So therefore, I'm not certain how much the brain's involved. Hmm. Well, okay. How about I threw out a few minutes ago about the shoulders as earrings. We see a connection sometimes when somebody is either stressed or scared. Um, does that tend to lead more towards monism, or can we still have a dualism mentality that they're separate things, but yet they influence each other?
I think personally, I agree with more of the materialism standpoint because I tend to have different coping mechanisms when I'm anxious or nervous or scared. Like I fidget a lot when I'm anxious
Mhm.
and like my palms get sweaty and like I don't know, I find my body working through the emotions in my mind. And so I think they're interconnected. For at least for me personally, I notice because I'm very aware of my emotions.
Mhm.
And so I can notice a difference in my appetite or just how I am daily with physical exercise, and I think they're interconnected.
Yeah, I love that perspective. It really makes a lot of sense. I'll jump back to the concept of the athlete that's associated with that. An argument that one could kind of have with an athlete, though, that would kind of support either or of the dualism or monism, materialism, whichever term you want to use on that, is that an athlete has trained their mind and trained their body to the point where there's almost like a trust level that, okay, I trust that my body is going to be able to muscle memory do things that it normally wouldn't be able to do. I can push beyond this limit because I trust my body will be able to do this. I don't know, does that training perspective, does that development of those systems add to either monoism or dualism?
I feel like it's kind of both, like they're both connected in that case.
Yeah.
I just think that kind of generally, but I'd lead more towards it being dualism. But I'm like a little bit on both because I could see both perspectives where if like you keep thinking you could do something, you could possibly push your body to do so. But in like a lot of situations, like the example, the ripping off the door, I feel like that's just adrenaline and doesn't really have a lot to do with the mind. And it's most all just the body.
Totally cool. Yeah, and again, great discussion. Stacy, what do you got?
Um, I play tennis competitively, and I think that it's definitely with the mind, the body and the mind work together because even during training, like I know personally, I talk myself through certain steps. Like if my form is off or anything like that, I know I talk to myself in my head and I tell myself like how to fix a form or like how to approach the net or the ball, certain things. Like I definitely talk myself through it. So I know it's connected with the mind, I think.
And I that I'm questioning, I'm not questioning you, I'm questioning what you're describing as the concept of how much does that work towards the individual person or demographic that we're actually studying at that point that it behaves slightly different? Or is this just a universal law per se? Note, these are theories, not laws. We have very few laws in psychology. I don't think we actually have any laws in psychology. Now I'm thinking about it. So wake up in the morning and you for something important in your body. So no one wants, your mind goes on alert and focus. Yep. Ahmed, I love that description because that's basically one of the reasons why my body gets me up in the morning. Although at the same point too, I would argue that it's partly associated with the training and the motivation that's associated with that, and it almost becomes a physical manifestation, which is that behavior, or does that become about the concept of we've instructed our body to do something? I don't know. I get up every morning at 6:45 to take my son to school. And even if I don't set an alarm, I'll actually start waking up at 6:15, 6:30. And here's that question about it too. It's not that if I forgot to set the alarm, I'll wake up a little bit earlier normally. I never tend to sleep in on something like that because it's highly important to me. And I've also been making certain, no, I know it's a school day. I have to take my son to school. So I tend to wake up a lot more just because of the fact that I've trained my body to do that. Now, is this a psychological process? Is this a physiological process? Or is it one continuous process? And I think that kind of gets to the heart of this debate between the two. Which discipline is kind of where I'm going with it with that too. I love that you specifically say it. That is discipline, but what is discipline? Are you disciplining your physical body to behave a certain way or your mind to behave a certain way? And Rebecca just said it's a fear of like a fear of missing a deadline. Well, yeah, but again, that's an emotion. That's definitely we're in the mind realm, but yet it manifests in the body. Now, is that directly connected, or is it just that the brain said, hey, body, you need to react such and such way? I'll argue that, again, I have a physical medicine practice. We have a phrase that we use very frequently: our tissues hold our issues. When we have a problem, where shoulders as earrings or any other type of problem that we could have psychologically, it will end up manifesting on the body somewhere. I will hardcore go into the hypnotized thing in a second because that's a beautiful argument. I'll give an argument about going into the realm of physics. We have an argument that kind of goes on both sides of this. A physical thought has an electrical impulse that happens inside the brain. It is something that can be measured, and it causes a chemical reaction. Okay, so one of Newton's laws of thermodynamics says energy cannot be lost or gained, it just changes form. So here's the thing. You have your thought, that thought has left. What happens to it once it leaves? Now, I would argue a person that is in a constant stress state, they're constantly anxious, their muscles tend to be a lot tighter because that's what they're giving the signal to their body. It has to manifest somewhere. Now, I cannot connect this with any evidence, but I can say that anecdotally, I've observed that there is a direct connection between what we think and how it manifests in our body. Is that crazy? Cool. Well, I'll jump back to the hypnotism statement. Hypnotism is such a cool concept about this too, because technically we can't do anything that we would ethically be uncomfortable with if we're hypnotized, because we're dealing with the subconscious. We'll kind of get into that probably with the next two theories that we look at, but ultimately the concept is that you can make suggestions to their subconscious that would then respond and they could respond physically. It almost argues more that there is a separate between the mind and the body, because you're not actually making people feel emotions. You're not even really having them behave a certain way under their own cognition. You're giving a suggestion to them to behave in that system of thought in their brain. So, well, I'll move on to the next spot. But yeah, the next thing we're looking at is philosophical realism, and this comes from a guy named John Locke. Initially, this came about by Aristotle, so it's a very old circumstance. Reason why I have the Declaration of Independence here is John Locke was very much involved with the writing of the Declaration of Independence, so that's some time frame that connects with this too. But they assert that the real world exists separately from our perceptions. So it's like we're seeing a photograph of what we're seeing in the real world. So we take the information in from our eyes. We're not actually seeing the real world according to this mentality. We're seeing a perception of that world. We're seeing a little bit of it, not truly as it is, but what our brains see as important and works with it. So there's some positives, some negatives on this mentality. Definitely you can go into like the Matrix movies and things like this too, because really you can live your entire world in your own head with this mentality. This has been very useful for the concepts of how we've learned about stimuli and how we actually connect to different types of perception. Like this philosophy has given rise to a lot of information. Now, in developmental psychology, we have this concept of the blank slate. It's something that we specifically it led to that perspective of it too, that we kind of start with nothing, and that all the sensory information we take in will inform the way we behave and the way we think. Yeah. So again, another two different sorry, I'll jump back to this as well too. We also then have idealism. This was brought about by Immanuel Kant, the guy that came up with theoretical and categorical imperatives. He specifically also criticized Locke. So I mean, here again, we have some white guys that are arguing, and they were doing it publicly in writing, and that's how these theories came about. So Kant believed that people are born with innate structures, meaning that they're naturally just a part of them, that help them interpret sensory information and lead towards getting further information. So instead of specifically saying that we have a circumstance of we perceive everything coming in, we interpret it, and it's not getting the real world doesn't really truly exist concept, to we're actually almost being part of the creation of our own reality through this. There's just they're either sides of the same coin. So with that said, we have four theories now that we have to kind of work with. Which or both or all of these do you identify more with the way that you see the world right now? I mean, is the world real? I guess that's a main question. Does the world truly exist? Anybody? Does the world exist? Which of these tend to resonate for you? Materialism and idealism. That makes a lot of sense. So we have basically the concept that the mind is what the brain does, and that we take the information from the world around us, and it shapes how we understand things. Yeah, those two make sense together. Could we have a dualism perspective as well as idealism? Is it possible? I'll offer a way to look at that. So let's say I'll use a different simile. This is like a circumstance of we have a manager that doesn't really work physically on the line inside of an organization. That would be the brain. The brain then says to the employee, go do this. However, the information they get from those employees about what they're seeing and doing in the world would be actually reported back to the manager. They would be separate entities into that point. Now, the brain could be interpreted the same way. Cool. I won't labor on this much at this point too, because I mean, I think we already had pretty big discussions on this. The next, we tried to answer, how do we learn stuff? That's the main next thing we're trying to do. We had two major theories associated with that. We have empiricism. Again, John Locke came up with this. He came up with that concept of the blank slate, the tabula rasa. Very big about we have to make observations and empirically test those. So if it's not testable, it doesn't really work a lot of ways. So it overlooks some of the cognitive structures that are involved it by um, idealism as well as nativism is what we'll go in next. But we tend to find a balance between what we see as innate and what we experience. So, yeah, it basically says that all of our knowledge comes from our sensory experience. Nativism actually says that we are born with innate abilities. They're present at birth. Some people even argue sooner, depending on how red you vote. And some of those things just come primarily from birth on. Now, this has been useful for the developmental psychology perspective. And it's kind of useful to do it, but it kind of comes to me that we have this argument to kind of start. This is the nature versus nurture argument. We have a circumstance of, like, let's say we look at a young child that's born lying in front of us. Do they really have emotions? Or do they learn emotions based off of what they observe? And this has a lot to do with the concept of crying it out when a baby is being taught how to sleep train, so they'll sleep through the entire night, so they can become more self-sufficient. That would be more on the imperialist point of view. The nature would be that the body can self-regulate. It knows it needs to have this. It just needs to get some more information in. Yeah, and you made a good point with that too. Certainly, emotions can be inherited. I mean, the crying for food. Yes, we have a biological imperative to eat, and biological imperative would mean that biologically we are hardwired as a species to eat, reproduce, and get rest. I mean, to meet our needs that we have. So there's kind of like a little bit of a both on this, but it comes down to it. How much are we really born with? How much of this stuff is really innate? And that's kind of that argument to start with. Oh, I would love to hear a little bit more, Jesse. You said certain motions are actually learned through human interaction. Totally agree. Give us an example.
I don't know. I just personally think that like just like certain emotions are because emotions are a lot more than just like the word that we say they are. Just like on like on a deeper level, they're just so complex and I think they're just something that can't really just be like I don't know what I'm trying to say is basically I just think that there's something that you like learn when you're a child and just kind of internalize just like through hours and hours of like just like kind of watching your parents as a child who can't really do too much for yourself but kind of just like absorb and internalize all this like surrounding information as a sponge. So I think that like most of like these really like deep and complex emotions are stuff that we gradually learn like through our parents like when we're like younger because like babies are just like just like on so many levels they can absorb knowledge like it's nobody's business.
And I love that, and I agree in almost every single case that we definitely are massively influenced by the nurture perspective, the empiricist. Sorry, my tongue is not doing what I want it to today. What and something that was just commented in the chat. We learn fear throughout our lives. You know, I agree that we do learn how to interpret fear differently throughout our whole lives. But what's kind of interesting about that is, oh, and I love the gender perspectives on this as well too. That's another one I personally love looking at norms of that. But let's look at the fear perspective. Fear actually can be, and they've done quite a bit of research on this too, looking at the fight or flight response. So we almost have this biological imperative not to be eaten. Like if we're trying to kill a bear to eat. And I know we're going very, very far back on this, but it's a good fundamental way of looking at it. That fear itself can be colored and changed, and the way we look at it is very different, but it would almost say that we have, at our nature, we have the ability to fear. It's one of the core emotions, but it almost feels like it gets nurtured differently. So let's take an emotion out of this that normally would not be something that would be present early on, because to follow the argument that was made a little bit ago, let's look at the emotion Schadenfreude. Does anybody know what Schadenfreude is? Cool. Schadenfreude, it very big fun German word. There's actually even a song about this in the musical Avenue Q. Schadenfreude is the happiness at the misfortune of others. So, a way to describe this is, somebody just cut you off in traffic. And then when they cut you off in traffic, they immediately get pulled over by a police officer. You're experiencing an emotion at that point that can be described as the happiness because they had a misfortune. Now, of course, it may be justified and things like that too. I would argue a baby wouldn't be able to really understand what that emotion is. They wouldn't know what misfortune is. I don't know. When we throw that emotion in, does that fit at either one of those frames? Jamal, I love your comment.
Don't babies like laugh when someone like falls or gets like hit in the head with the ball still though?
Well,
Wouldn't that be that emotion?
very good point. Yes. Yes, they do. But is it about the fact that it's misfortune or just, well, you moved. You moved fast. Um, we still haven't gotten the concept of object permanence yet with a young baby yet, and we'll go into that when we get to the developmental psychology section. But basically, what is actually real to them? I mean, when you play peekaboo, literally that person disappears. So I would argue that falling down, it's just that, well, that's funny. You're behaving weird, and I like it because it just makes me, I feel connected to you because of that. So that's not really that almost like malice perspective, the less dark trait involved. Then I don't know. This is a debate that will continue going on forever and forever. It's also one that's starting to be applied a lot to AI right now because we have an emerging intelligence. There's an argument that at some point, if not already, there will be some aspect of sentience that will happen for AI. Should we be nurturing aspects of that? Or does it innately have this information that it was programmed with? Reese, you made a great point. Yeah, and karma actually can be. It was the concept of karma was developed in a different culture, but karma can explain a lot of the concepts of Schadenfreude. So cool. I'll jump to the next section too because I just want to get it too. Now, the point that kind of that it just a little bit of a way to look on it, and I'd love to know what you guys' thoughts on this. When we look back at a lot of these historical figures and these people that we're talking about, um, to be honest, a lot of these previous psychologists, these old white guys, some of them were just absolutely horrible human beings. Again, should we look at them and judge their philosophies, their ideas under our own current mindset, or should we look at it through theirs? Where is all of that too? Some examples of questions like that too is, are current American citizens responsible for the sins of their ancestors? This is a big thing that's in social psychology now about reparations. Should we be paying any aspect of reparations? And paying does not mean financial. Should we still be dealing with that? How far should we go? Anybody thoughts? I can just leave that perspective for everybody here too. We can't really look at everything always through our lens. We have to look at through theirs. And it ultimately comes down to the individual about what you believe and what consistently you say, this is why I believe the brain works the way it does. So we started moving from all of those original theories that we mentioned into actual psychology. We're actually now going into the realm where we start calling this psychology. So late 1800s, we started dealing with that. Hermann von Helmholtz was one of the first people that he started looking, saying, our mental processes can actually be measured scientifically. So they had started ways of looking at stimulus and things like that too. How does a stimulus affect a person's responses? This is another perspective of it. Wilhelm Wundt was the father of structuralism. He actually came up with the first psychological laboratory as well as first university. He was an advisor, meaning he helped with the dissertations, helping people get prepared for their own research for 184 students. That's huge. Most of the time, during a person's career, they will probably do about 20 to 30, and that would be a very prolific person. What's interesting is that almost any modern psychologist can very easily trace back their advisors to say who studied with whom to see how to connect with William Wundt. I'm 6 generations out. I actually looked through my advisor's advisor up back, and I am 6 generations out from him. Nothing really. That's just a cool piece of anecdotal information, but we all actually still do connect with these mentalities. Now, we don't actually use structuralism anymore, but the mentality becomes very good. Ultimately, the big thing that structuralism kind of has given us is psychology's goal should be to study the structure of the mind. That's the only thing that's really maintained out of any of it. So, what is structuralism? Trying to identify elements of consciousness, believes that mental experiences can be broken down into sensations, feelings, and images, like meaning that we actually, when we have an experience, we log it as an image or some other type of cognitive tool in our brain. They try to get laws to understand how mental things tend to work. We do not have laws in psychology because everything is still theory until we can actually say this will always happen. Again, this is not like physics yet because we don't really have the tools, and it's a newer field of study. The main thing that we try to do is introspection. We have people in the structuralist point of view to observe and report their mental experiences. And then systematically we start going through it. Sounds a lot like therapy, doesn't it? Well, structuralism came to the United States. Titchener actually is the one that developed introspection, and this fundamental thought actually connect to how we actually think and how we sense things. So that's kind of what's been brought with it. With that said, structuralism ended up failing. We focused too much on introspection with that too, meaning that you think about something so much, well, it tends to almost become the reality on that. So it kind of even goes back into that empiricism perspective of we're nurturing a perspective that it kind of changes. So those kind of connect with each other about how that kind of knocks that point out. Also, it's really hard to duplicate introspection because it's looking at the individual and their lens of looking at the world. based off of all their experiences. Unless you have a substantially large amount of twins or quadruples or things like that too, it's really hard to actually get some of the same biological things to separate that out. Even then, you're going to still have issues working with it too. It also doesn't look at the unconscious influences. So we were mentioning too about tearing the door off of a car. Well, that would be an unconscious thing based off of a biological response to what's happening around them. Also, these things didn't really explain any of the functions in the brain or any of the emotions or why we even behave. So we started having some different ones as well too. Functionalism. It helps us with how we adapt to certain mental processes, as well as behaviorism. Looking at the observable behavior, and so how do we observe those type of things and not really doing introspection. We tend in almost all mental health therapy and psychology look at a version of behaviorism called behavioral humanism, and it's something that we tend to do mostly with our theories. Great thing though, structuralism laid a foundation, but it has its limitations, and that's what led to its decline. Cool. In functionalism, we also everything was basically the concept of this was to start looking at. Sorry, William James developed this. Functionalism paid a lot more intent on looking at how people adapt to their environment. So it's if you go into the literature perspective of saying self versus other, self versus self, self versus environment, this is self versus environment. And the environment tends to this led a little bit more on the developmental psychology perspective, but it kind of gives that perspective of, well, what is real and how are we being adapted with that? Some big people that are worth noting in the fundamental mentalities were Charles Darwin. So he came about right around the same time too. And we talk about environment. Environment is what dictates the concept of evolution in that theory. So it connected. There's another one that I didn't cover in the lecture here too, but his name is Sir Edward Galton. I will be covering him in next class, but he was actually a cousin of Darwin. He's the one that came up with the biggest version of statistics that we look at, and he also was a functionalismist. Again, tongue not doing what I wanted to do. We also started looking at psychoanalysis and behaviorism at that point too. So we had some early people on this as well too. They started studying hypnosis because, and even we came to that question earlier, can hypnosis actually impact the connection between the body and the mind? Totally cool. So a temporary loss of cognitive or motor functions results from emotionally upsetting experience. That was a concept of hysteria that was present with this too. Now again, hysteria was normally associated very gendered wise to women, so it could be a lot of issues. This influenced a lot with Sigmund Freud, our next guy. He was the father of analytics, of psychoanalytics. He came up with a psychoanalytic theory. He himself was not actually officially a psychologist. He was a psychiatrist. There tends to be a little bit of an overlap with that as well too. But again, we'll go a lot into Freud and his specific ideas, but basic thing is he came up with psychoanalytic theory, as well as blaming mom for everything. He had that part of that movement too. Carl Jung was a very big person as well too. And psychoanalytic theory became a little bit more controversial because the methods they were using to test these things they're very difficult tests to administer. So we used tests like the Rorschach test, which are called predictive tests. Predictive tests are where you give somebody an ink blot and they say, well, what do you see? And you're interpreting it, how they analyze that and how certain images should look like certain things, and therefore their interpretation of that image gives a lot of information about what might be either pathologically wrong or how the brain is actually wired. We started looking at behaviorism as well too. The biggest person that most people will look at with behaviorism is Pavlov, as in the dog. When you ring the bell, the dog would salivate because it thought it was going to be able to eat. So we have a stimulus response. This is one of the things where we're actually able to test this. We're able to get this in human beings as well as some animals. This is actually a picture of the actual real dog, which I feel terrible, but I don't know what that dog's name is. I need to find that out. Hopefully it has a name, because that would be horrible if it didn't. But oh well. But yeah, Pavlov, we'll definitely be talking more about Pavlov as well too. Family Guy's done some great things, commenting about just how horrible Pavlov was to the dog, because fact of the matter is they made the dog salivate to eat, and yeah, every time they hear a bell, they start thinking, "Oh, I'm gonna eat." They didn't get to, so not cool. Watson also took those concepts and he started applying them even further into human beings. So much so that we're starting to look at like this ad here specifically. Do you want your teeth to ache and get ugly? Okay, well now we're asking somebody to connect to a stimulus. That's the stimulus. They're trying to connect the sizzle in the steak to the actual steak. Nobody buys a steak. People buy the sizzle in the steak, meaning that they're thinking about the experience of eating the steak, not actually buying the steak itself. That's how this thing is connected to marketing as well as how people can connect this. B.F. Skinner was another person that helped develop with that as well too. Did a lot of work specifically with rats, and also any behavior that isn't rewarded specifically won't be repeated. That's something that we tend to see as well too. We tend to not see types of behaviors like that. There have been some continued studies too about equity responses and how we have almost like innate perspectives of those type of behaviors, which is definitely showing right now in the American workforce and well, the general workforce of the world, based off of how much we're getting paid for the type of work we're doing as well too. So that's been another connection of that. There's been some resistance to the concepts of behavioralism, and that's been primarily through the concept of Gestalt psychology. You'll notice a lot of German words because a lot of them were German that were coming up with these too. But we'll use an example here too, that in Gestalt psychology, they're saying that the mind creates an image about what they're perceiving in the environment that's going on. So the sign that we've got here too, the sign actually, the tickers thing of the NASDAQ and stuff like that we see, the lights are not moving. I mean, the lights themselves and the words are not moving. We're actually seeing a change in the lights going from being on to off as it's moving on further. The brain interprets that it's moving because it's perceiving the fact that we have a movement in this concept, but really it's not. It's not moving at all. It's either lights are on or off. In the physical art realm, things like pointillism, like studying in the what is his name? Who's the guy that did the pointillism? Brain stopping. I can't remember. It basically it's in the Chicago Museum of Art. I cannot remember, but it's basically he painted a bunch of dots. The closer you get, you see just dots. The further back you get from the image, you start actually perceiving, oh, this is actually a park image. The same thing too, even our computer screens that we're looking at too, every single one of these things are moving images and stuff like that too to our brain, but really they're not moving. We're just seeing pixels going on and off, and we're perceiving movement is happening. So that's a big thing about how we're actually starting to look at how the stimulus is coming into the brain. A lot of this has led to cognitive psychology, which the one of the concepts of this is that the brain's not actually just a recording device. It's a way to interpret how we get more information. So they specifically research why people would often remember what they had expected to read rather when they actually read. So we have almost a preconceived notion about what's happening. Again, this dual process theory. In system one of dual processing, we have an innate response. This is just the way the body will react to something. In the second system, we get things called heuristics, or perspectives that we are having an expectation based off of prior experiences, which then informs system one to say, no, I don't actually agree with what's happening. This is really what is going to be the most salient piece of information that's coming through. So kind of interesting with that. Again, we start getting specifically into developmental psychology. We'll go into massive detail on this for just dealing with kids. If working with kids is your main jam, that's awesome. There is an entire gigantic field with this, and to go into it anything less than a longer lecture would literally be just not giving it justice. It is a very important area. Social psychology, which is more my area, behavior of groups. So we start looking about saying groups of people will behave a certain way. This tends to work a lot with in the workforce, as well as behaviors of larger we could say all women will behave such and such way, or all African American women will behave a certain way because there are certain things that are common among those. Again, Ash was another one of the big ones. Allport was another big one as well too. We started getting into stereotyping, prejudice, racism, things like that too. You'll notice too that the time frame of these tend to be a little bit more present when we're dealing with things like social changes in our world. Right around the time where these ideas were coming up, we were dealing with race riots in the 60s in the United States. We had just come off of the eugenics movement, and a lot of these things were just basically prejudice, stereotyping points of view that were all completely error-based off of some of the work that Galton did. So again, we'll go back into that more next week, but a lot of psychology has a lot to do with the way that the people are in the environment that they're living in choose to study it and dealing with the problems they're having. But we can look at the perspective of this guy right here too. Which one of them is more intelligent? Now, I'm not asking you to do this right now too, but I'm certain you innately would likely say the guy on the left. Now, again, they're the same guy most likely. Just we're seeing a piece of information, and we tend to think that a person that has tattoos is less intelligent. We also tend to not trust people that are wearing hats. Also, the person on the left likely has a much better paying job, has more responsibilities, has probably more cognitive experiences compared to the one that is on the right, which likely isn't working in a job that requires anything but manual labor. Now, again, I'm not saying that these are my beliefs. I'm saying that that is what most people will have when they look at these images. That's part of the problem that we're trying to see too. Are we really looking at the individual, or how do we actually manage this with dealing with preconceived notions, and how do we overcome those? So that's a big thing that we're dealing with in psychology. Some other big ones to mention are the mentalist phenomenon. Ways to be able to persuade people how to change their views. Again, more stereotype views. Looking at social identities of different groups. So Sharif, I've cited Sharif a couple times, but that brought about the concept of social identity theory, meaning do I identify with my in-group, out-group? I've kind of worked with that too. And also then we started looking at how people infer what somebody wants based off of their intention. Again, how do we come up with these things? Well, again, we're getting more and more and more empirical evidence to be able to support saying, hey, this theory seems like it makes sense. Until we get something to disprove that, it's actually something that can be used to understand the world. Now, a lot of these perspectives, they sound kind of crazy, but that inferring perspective actually has made it to where some psychologists have found lost ships at sea based off of the behaviors of some of the captains that were involved with that. Some psychologists actually were looked and they were able to locate this warship. That's one of the early versions of that. Now, whenever we write papers, we're trying to predict what behavior will be like with people based off of observations that we make, and then we infer off of that. Inferential statistics is the concept of what we're looking at. We started having more of the behavioral perspective about the cognitive revolution. Young children generate sentences before they've even heard them. It's something that we started seeing. Well, okay, now we're starting to talk about how language is enforced. Okay, language colors a lot of the way we think and how we communicate what we're thinking. So that's something that's been coming a lot more out. We started getting with cognitive psychology. We're starting to use computers to be able to understand physical information about what's happening inside the brain. So we're seeing a lot more MRIs, things like that, looking at as well too. Desires can shape certain things. Visual memory, all of these things are still happening and going on. Now we're actually getting starting closer into like living psychologists. It's kind of great. Evolutionary psychology is another area we're kind of going more into now as well too, where animals come into the world biologically prepared, but some adapt differently. Now, it almost sounds like we're kind of stepping back into the Darwin world, and we kind of are, but it's connected even more now, and we're starting to look at that as well too. We're starting to look at those as well too about in the experimental psychology about talking about how we have just different gender differences about sexual promiscuity. Well, okay, do we have stereotypes on that? Yes, we do. We're using that about saying how we can detect what cheating is, meaning are we actually having people that are being unfair in those pictures? And also, how do we find the ideal person we're looking for? I mean, mating is a biological imperative. So let's try and understand what's going on behind that. Neuroscience is a very big thing that we're starting to go a lot more into. Some of you may actually choose specifically to go into neuroscience. And it's where we're actually taking a lot more information specifically on the biological perspective of what's happening in the brain to understand that. fMRIs are big, but we're also doing a lot with animals. There's an awful lot of animal testing type of things going on at Brooklyn College. It's something I would recommend looking a lot more into to see kind of what some of the other people there are doing. Yeah, behavioral neuroscience. We've covered a lot of that too, covered fMRIs. Cultural psychology, entire another field. This also connect to another field completely. We're looking at sociologists. This tends to be their area. They would argue that they're a completely different field. I don't know if it's going to be seen that way in 50 years, but we are looking at similar things. They use some of our tools. We use some of their tools. Again, whatever works just to get those information. But we're starting to look at about how culture actually has evolved. We're starting now also to look at different evidences now on things that are bringing in different types of behavior. So an example of what we see here is that people of different social classes behave differently towards others. As you can see here too, we tend to have a larger connection between the higher class of your vehicle either hitting a pedestrian or cutting off another vehicle. We tend to see that more in higher class vehicles. Okay, well, we can infer out of that there's less focus on the individual outside of self at that point, which has a different belief on a different type of socioeconomic class. That's kind of being involved in the world we have now. We have organizations that can help us with this. The American Psychological Association is a very big one. It's the main one we have. I actually think we have over 100,000 people now. The Association for Psychological Sciences is another one as well too. More so, it's on the research side. The APA tends to come up with a lot more, not just research, but also how does the research get into the general world. So there's a lot more community outreach with that group. Also, APA is the APA format. The association, the American Psychological Association comes up with the APA format. So who actually does become a psychologist? This is a good thing too. There are some pretty big women, because we've not really mentioned any of them too. So one of the bigger ones to at least mention to start with as well too is Mary here. She was the very first president of the APA. What was interesting about her too is that she was denied getting her PhD at Harvard because, being a woman, was told that she was not able to get the PhD from that school, despite her advisor saying that she was the best student that he had ever had. It was Margaret Washburn that actually got her first PhD in psychology. Again, we start having some firsts as well with those as well too. We'll go more into some of the individuals a little bit later, but again, the very first class normally is a story of white guys. Here's some of their pictures as well too about who they are. Most undergraduate psychology students end up going to graduate school and end up conducting research if that's something you're interested in. I personally like publishing with my undergrads. So it's something that if like the papers you guys are writing up, if that's a topic that I think could be developed a little bit further, I can get either a data set or something like that, and we can work towards getting that published. And you also would be an author as well on that too. I've published 2 different papers with my students at Brooklyn just as an adjunct. So that's another motivation thing behind this too. If you are interested in publishing, I will totally work with you to make that type of thing happen. When you look at it, and this is something that a lot of people don't think about, when we think of psychology, we tend to think about clinical psychology, but there is so much more of different options. You'll notice here too, the industrial organizational psychology is about 4.5%. That's actually the highest paid section of this area if you are just going by individual job. So, but we have different things too. I mean, you can work with a casino, you can work in a school. There's a whole bunch of different realms where psychology can be directly applicable to you. That's what we got. That went way too long. I apologize. I would love to know if this was too long, if this was not enough engaged, and again, this does not need to be a now thing, but I want to make this be less sucky for every single person just sitting through and dealing with this. Was this interesting? I mean, I don't want this just to be a boring, terrible 100 level class. Cool. Well, again, the more you bring into it, the more interesting it becomes because I just don't want to be a talking head. Yay. Okay, everybody get the heck out of Dodge. I'll see you next week.
Goodbye, Professor. Thank you
Thank
so much.
you.
Oh, please
great
call me
week.
Matthew. I don't Professor's okay if you need to say that, but I like Matthew.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Have a good week. Take care.
Have
Bye
Have a
bye.
good day, Matthew.
Have a good day.
Okay, I'm signing everybody out. Abiento.